A little girl ran up to a stranger on the street and begged him for help. Her small hands were shaking as she grabbed onto his jacket, her voice breaking with fear and desperation. 4 thugs were closing in behind her, laughing, calling her names, their voices echoing through the nearly empty street. They moved like predators who'd cornered their prey, confident, cruel, enjoying every second of her terror. The man she grabbed onto. He wore faded jeans, old boots, and a calm expression that didn't match the chaos unfolding around him. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't look like someone who could save anyone. He looked ordinary. Just another guy walking home after a long day, minding his own business, trying to stay out of trouble. The thugs thought he was just another scared bystander who would turn away and pretend he didn't see anything. Someone who would keep walking, pull out his phone, maybe call 911 from a safe distance. They'd seen it 100 times before. People who looked the other way because they didn't want to get involved. But they had no idea who they were about to face. They had no clue that the quiet man in the worn-out jacket had spent decades mastering martial arts. That his calm demeanor wasn't weakness, it was control. That his silence wasn't fear, it was focus. Because that quiet stranger standing between them and the little girl was Chuck Norris, the living legend, the martial arts icon. The man whose name had become synonymous with strength itself. And what happened in the next 5 minutes became the story people still talk about on that street today. The kind of story that gets passed around in barbershops and coffee shops. The kind of moment that reminds people that heroes don't always wear capes or announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they just show up in old boots and faded jeans, ready to do what's right no matter the cost. The little girl didn't know who he was. She just knew she needed help, and he was there. The thugs didn't recognize him. They just saw an old man they thought they could intimidate. But in moments, everything would change. The laughter would stop. The confidence would shatter. And 4 men would learn a lesson they'd never forget. Because when you underestimate someone based on how they look, when you assume kindness means weakness, when you think you can do whatever you want without consequences, that's when reality has a way of teaching you otherwise. And Chuck Norris, he was about to become their teacher. It was a cold Thursday evening in downtown Dallas, the kind of cold that seeps through your jacket and makes you walk a little faster, hands shoved deep in your pockets, breath visible in the air. The streets were starting to empty as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Shops were closing one by one, their neon signs flickering off, metal security gates rolling down with loud clangs that echoed through the quiet streets. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. The usual hustle and bustle of the day had faded, leaving behind only a few stragglers, people heading home after work, a couple of homeless individuals huddled near a closed storefront, a jogger in the distance. Chuck had just finished a quiet dinner at a local diner. No cameras, no fans, no fuss, no celebrity treatment. Just a simple meal at a corner booth where nobody bothered him, where he could enjoy his coffee and read the paper in peace. That's how he liked it. Away from the spotlight, away from the noise, just normal, just human. He walked slowly down the sidewalk now, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. Just another face in the crowd. His boots made soft scraping sounds against the concrete as he moved past darkened storefronts and parked cars. There was something peaceful about these quiet moments, walking alone through the city as it settled into evening. No interviews. No photo shoots. No one asking him to perform a roundhouse kick or repeat his famous lines. Just Chuck. Just a man enjoying a walk. That's when he heard it.
"Please! Someone help me!"
A small voice cut through the silence like a knife, sharp and panicked and desperate. It was the kind of cry that makes your stomach drop, that stops you in your tracks no matter who you are or where you're going. He turned and saw her, a girl, maybe 8 years old, running full speed toward him with everything she had. Her backpack bounced wildly on her shoulders, too big for her small frame, threatening to throw her off balance with each frantic step. Her face was streaked with tears that caught the streetlight, her eyes wide with pure terror, her mouth open in ragged breaths. She was running like her life depended on it, and maybe it did. And behind her, 4 men in hoodies were stalking her like wolves circling wounded prey. They moved with the casual arrogance of people who knew they had the upper hand, who'd done this before, who enjoyed the hunt.
"Hey, sweetheart, we just want to talk."
One of them called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness that made your skin crawl. Come back here, kid. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Another one added, laughing like this was all just a game to him. They were laughing. Actually laughing. Treating her fear like entertainment, like something to mock. They kept a steady pace behind her, not rushing, because they knew she'd tire out eventually. They had all the time in the world. Or so they thought. Chuck didn't move. He just stood there. Calm. Watching, assessing, his eyes tracked every movement, the girl's desperate sprint, the men's confident strides, the distance between them, the empty street around them. His body language didn't change. His breathing stayed steady. But his mind was already 3 steps ahead, already calculating, already deciding. The girl reached him and grabbed his jacket with both hands, her small fingers clutching the fabric like a lifeline. Please, mister. They're trying to take my bag. My mom's medicine is in there. Please. Her voice cracked on the word, please. And her whole body trembled as she looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much fear for someone so young. Her eyes were wide, honest, afraid, pleading. Chuck looked down at her, his expression softening for just a moment, then slowly raised his head to face the men approaching. One of them, tall with a scar across his cheek that ran from his eye to his jaw, stepped forward, grinning like he'd already won. Old man, walk away. This doesn't concern you. His voice was low, threatening, meant to intimidate. His 3 friends spread out slightly behind him, flanking positions, boxing them in. Before we continue, drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? And if you've ever stood up for someone weaker than you, type arrow in the comments. Let's honor real courage. Chuck didn't answer. He just gently moved the girl behind him with one steady hand, positioning himself as a barrier between her and danger. His movements were slow, deliberate, protective, the kind of gesture that said more than words ever could. The lead thug stopped a few feet away, sizing him up with eyes that had clearly done this assessment many times before. He looked Chuck up and down, the gray hair, the worn jacket, the relaxed posture, and clearly didn't like what he was seeing, or rather he liked it too much. He saw an easy target. You deaf, Grandpa, I said, walk away. His voice grew louder, more aggressive, trying to assert dominance through volume and intimidation. Chuck's voice came out calm, almost conversational, like he was discussing the weather instead of facing down 4 criminals. She says you tried to take her bag. So what? That's between us and her, not you. The thug took another step closer, invading Chuck's personal space, trying to make him uncomfortable, trying to make him back down. His breath smelled like cigarettes and cheap beer, and his eyes had that wild look of someone who enjoyed hurting people. Chuck's voice stayed calm, steady as a rock, unmoved by the proximity or the threat. Make it between you and me. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that comes right before a storm. The thugs looked at each other, eyebrows raised, smirks spreading across their faces, and then they burst out laughing. Loud, mocking laughter that echoed off the buildings around them, the kind of laughter meant to humiliate and belittle. You serious right now? One of them wheezed between laughs. Doubling over like this was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Bro, this dude's like 60. What's he gonna do? Another one chimed in, wiping tears from his eyes. Probably doesn't even know how to throw a punch. The third one added, shadow, boxing the air mockingly. They were enjoying themselves, playing to each other, feeding off the group energy, getting bolder by the second. One of them, the shortest but stockiest of the group, pulled out a pocket knife from his hoodie and flicked it open with practiced ease. The blade caught the streetlight, glinting menacingly as he tilted it back and forth, letting Chuck see exactly what he was dealing with. Last chance, old man. Walk away or we'll make you regret it. He pointed the knife in Chuck's direction, making small jabbing motions in the air, trying to scare him into submission. Chuck still didn't move. His expression didn't change. Not even a flicker of concern crossed his face. His eyes stayed locked on the knife, then moved up to meet the thug's gaze with an intensity that should have been a warning. You might want to put that away before someone gets hurt. His tone was almost gentle, like he was giving friendly advice, like he genuinely cared about their well-being. The thug with the knife sneered, emboldened by his friend's laughter and his own false confidence. Yeah, and who's gonna hurt us, you? Chuck's response was simple, quiet, and carried the weight of absolute certainty. If I have to. That should have been their cue to leave. That should have been the moment they reconsidered their life choices. But pride and stupidity are a dangerous combination. The scar-faced thug, the leader, couldn't let this disrespect stand in front of his crew. He lunged forward with a roar, swinging a fist straight at Chuck's head with all his strength, putting his full weight behind the punch. It was meant to be a knockout blow, the kind of sucker punch that ends fights before they start. But Chuck wasn't there anymore. In a blur of motion so fast the eye could barely track it, he sidestepped like water flowing around a rock. The punch sailed through empty air, where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. Before the thug could even process what happened, Chuck grabbed the man's extended wrist mid-swing with one hand. His grip was like iron, fingers locking around bone and tendon with precision born from decades of training. In one smooth, fluid motion, he twisted the wrist behind the man's back, applying just enough pressure to control without breaking. Then he swept the thug's legs out from under him, with a perfectly timed kick to the back of the knee. The thug hit the pavement hard, his face smacking against the concrete with a sickening thud that made everyone wince. His knife clattered across the ground, spinning and skidding until it disappeared under a parked car. The whole sequence took maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. The other three froze, their laughter dying in their throats like someone had hit a mute button. Their eyes were wide, mouths hanging open, brains struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. What the? Did you see that? Why is this guy? Their voices overlapped, confusion and the first hints of fear creeping into their tones. Chuck stood over the groaning man, utterly composed, his breathing unchanged, like he'd just tied his shoe instead of neutralizing a threat. I gave you a chance. You didn't take it. His voice carried no anger, no satisfaction, just a simple statement of fact. The second thug, stockier and angrier than the others, his face red with rage and embarrassment, couldn't let this stand. He charged with a roar that was more animal than human, fists swinging wildly. Technique abandoned in favor of raw aggression. Chuck ducked under a wild haymaker that would have taken his head off if it had connected. The punch whistled through the air above him, the thug's knuckles missing by inches. Before the man could recover his balance, Chuck delivered a sharp elbow to the ribs with surgical precision. The impact made a hollow sound, and the air rushed out of the thug's lungs in a pained gasp. Then Chuck spun smoothly, his body moving like a dancer, and landed a perfectly placed kick to the man's chest. The thug flew backward through the air like he'd been hit by a car, arms windmilling uselessly. He crashed into a trash can with a loud metallic crash that echoed down the street, the can crumpling under his weight. Garbage spilled everywhere as he slumped to the ground, groaning and clutching his ribs. Now the remaining two were nervous, really nervous. Their bravado had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning realization that they'd made a terrible mistake. Yo, maybe we should just... One of them started, his voice shaking, taking an involuntary step backward. Shut up. There's still two of us. We can take him. The other one interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. He was trying to convince himself more than his friend. They rushed him together, hoping that numbers would make the difference, that overwhelming him with simultaneous attacks would work. Big mistake. Huge. Chuck moved like water, smooth, fast, precise, absolutely in control. He blocked a punch from the left with his forearm, the impact barely moving him. He countered with a palm strike to the jaw of the attacker on the right, snapping the man's head back. Before the first attacker could throw another punch, Chuck swept one man's leg, sending him crashing to the ground. Then he caught the other with a spinning back fist that connected with a sharp crack, dropping him instantly beside his friend. Within 10 seconds, all four thugs were on the ground, groaning, disoriented, defeated, their tough guy personas shattered like glass, leaving only pain and regret. Chuck straightened his jacket calmly, brushing off some dust like he'd just finished a light workout, instead of dismantling four attackers. He turned to the little girl, who was staring at him like she'd just seen a superhero step out of a movie screen and into real life. Her mouth was hanging open, her eyes were huge, and she seemed frozen in awe.
You okay?
She nodded slowly, eyes still wide, unable to form words for a moment. Why, you're really strong, mister. Chuck smiled gently. The kind of smile that crinkles the eyes and radiates warmth. Just had good teachers. One of the thugs, the one with the scar across his face, sat up slowly, clutching his ribs and wincing with every breath. He squinted at Chuck through the pain, his eyes narrowing as recognition started to dawn. Something about the way Chuck moved, the confidence, the technique, it was clicking in his memory. Wait a minute. I know you. His voice was shaky, uncertain. like he couldn't believe what his brain was telling him. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands, nearly dropping it twice, and frantically typed something into Google. His face went pale as he stared at the screen, all the color draining away as realization hit him like a freight train. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. His friends turned to look at him, concern replacing confusion. What? What is it? The scarred thug turned his phone around, his hand shaking so badly the screen was hard to see. That's Chuck Norris. The others leaned in to look at the screen, and one by one, their faces went through the same transformation, confusion, recognition, horror. They turned to look at Chuck, then back at the phone, then back at Chuck, like they couldn't reconcile what they were seeing. We just tried to fight Chuck Norris. We're idiots. We're complete idiots. Someone whispered a curse under their breath, the reality of what they'd done sinking in like lead in their stomachs. Drop a comment right now. Should Chuck let them go or call the cops? Type Farjavi or Justice. Let's see what you think. The thugs scrambled to their feet, wincing and groaning with every movement, their bodies already beginning to ache from the beating they'd just received. They held their hands up high in surrender, fingers spread wide, eyes darting nervously between Chuck and each other. The confidence and swagger from just minutes ago had completely vanished, replaced by genuine fear and desperation. Mr. Norris, we're so sorry. We didn't know. Their voices tumbled over each other, rushing to apologize, tripping over words in their panic to make things right. Chuck's voice cut through their rambling like a blade, quiet but commanding enough to silence them immediately. That's the problem, Chuck said quietly, his tone measured and deliberate. You didn't care who I was. You only care now because you're afraid. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and the thugs shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his gaze. They looked down at their feet, at the ground, anywhere but at the man whose eyes seemed to see right through their excuses. We made a mistake. A big mistake. Please don't, one of them started, his voice cracking with emotion, genuine remorse beginning to creep into his features. Chuck interrupted, gesturing toward the little girl who still stood behind him, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack. Don't what? Don't treat you the way you were treating her. The question landed like a physical blow, and the men visibly flinched. The scarred leader looked at Emma, really looked at her for the first time, and seemed to see her as an actual person rather than a target. Shame washed over his face, his jaw clenching as the weight of what they'd done settled on his shoulders. The men hung their heads, shoulders sagging under the burden of their guilt and the reality of their actions. You're right. We were wrong. We're sorry. The apology came out quieter this time, less desperate, more genuine, like they were finally understanding the gravity of their behavior. Chuck studied them for a long moment, his eyes moving from face to face, reading their expressions, measuring their sincerity. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, making each second feel like an eternity for the men waiting for judgment. Then he knelt down to the girl's level, his movement gentle and careful, bringing himself eye to eye with Emma. His weathered face softened as he looked at her, his voice taking on a warmth that contrasted sharply with the authority he'd shown moments before. What's your name, sweetheart? Emma, she replied, her voice small but steady, her eyes meeting his with a trust that was remarkable given what she'd just been through. Emma, what do you think? Should I let them go? The question surprised everyone. The thugs looked up sharply, hope flickering across their faces mixed with disbelief that their fate was being placed in the hands of the girl they'd terrorized. Emma looked at the men, really looked at them, her young face serious and thoughtful beyond her years. She chewed her bottom lip, considering, her eyes moving from one thug to another, seeing the shame and regret written on their faces. Then she looked back at Chuck, and when she spoke, her voice carried a wisdom that didn't belong to someone so young. My mom always says, people make mistakes, but they have to learn from them. Chuck smiled, pride and respect shining in his eyes as he regarded this brave little girl who'd shown more grace than most adults ever could. Smart mom. He stood and turned back to the thugs, his posture relaxed but his presence still commanding absolute attention. The men straightened slightly, hope warring with fear as they waited to hear what would come next. You heard her. You get one chance. Walk away. Change your ways. Don't make me regret this. His voice was firm, leaving no room for misunderstanding. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a final warning wrapped in mercy. We will. We promise. They responded in near unison, their voices earnest, their heads nodding vigorously. "Thank you, Mr. Norris. Thank you so much. We won't forget this. We swear." They limped off into the night, moving slowly, bodies aching, pride shattered, but perhaps, just perhaps, something better taking its place. They glanced back every few steps like they couldn't believe they were still walking, couldn't believe they'd been given a second chance they didn't deserve. One of them, the youngest, turned back one last time and mouthed, "Thank you," before disappearing around a corner. A small crowd had gathered during the commotion, drawn by the noise and the confrontation. People stood on the sidewalk, some emerging from nearby shops, others who'd been passing by and stopped to watch. Phones were out, recording, capturing the moment from multiple angles. Some people were already typing frantically, no doubt posting to social media. The videos already beginning their journey across the internet. One older woman in a long coat stepped forward from the crowd, her eyes wide with recognition and awe. She moved slowly, respectfully, like approaching someone she'd only ever seen on screens. "You're in, aren't you? Chuck Norris." Her voice wavered slightly with emotion, disbelief mixing with excitement. Chuck just nodded politely, his expression humble, uncomfortable with the attention as he always was. He wasn't one for making a scene or basking in recognition. He never had been. "Can we get a picture?" Someone else called out from the crowd, and suddenly multiple voices chimed in with the same request. Hands raised, phones ready, people pressing closer. The crowd's energy shifting from shocked observation to eager fandom. Chuck raised his hand gently, not dismissive but firm, creating a boundary with kindness. "Maybe later. Right now, I need to make sure she gets home safe." He placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder, redirecting attention back to what mattered. The little girl who needed to get home to her mother. The crowd murmured in understanding, respect, even appreciation for his priorities. Some people nodded approvingly, others smiled, a few called out,
You're a good man.
"And God bless you." Chuck gave them a small wave, then guided Emma away from the gathering, walking her down the sidewalk toward home. Behind them, the crowd buzzed with excitement, already sharing their stories, their videos, their brush with a living legend. But Chuck wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about getting Emma home safely. Because that's what heroes do. Chuck walked Emma down the block toward her apartment building, his long strides shortened to match her smaller steps. The evening had grown darker, the streetlights now fully illuminated, casting pools of yellow light along their path. She held his hand the whole way, her small fingers wrapped trustingly around his calloused palm, holding on like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. The fear from earlier had completely worn off now, replaced by an excited energy that bubbled out of her in nonstop chatter. "My mom's gonna freak out when I tell her what happened." Her voice was animated, her free hand gesturing wildly as she recounted the story she was already planning to tell. Chuck chuckled softly, a warm sound that rumbled in his chest. "Just tell her you were brave. That's what matters." Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide with disagreement, shaking her head emphatically. "But you were the brave one. You saved me?" Her voice was filled with awe and admiration, the kind of hero worship that only children can express so purely and honestly. Chuck squeezed her hand gently, his voice taking on the tone of someone imparting an important lesson. "Bravery isn't about being strong, Emma. It's about doing the right thing, even when you're scared." She thought about that for a moment, her young face scrunching up in concentration as she processed his words. Her steps slowed slightly as she turned the idea over in her mind, testing it against her own experience. Then she smiled, a bright, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "You're like a real-life superhero," Chuck laughed, a real laugh this time, shaking his head with self-deprecating humor. "Nah. Just a guy who knows a little karate." The understatement was so ridiculous that Emma giggled, and they continued walking together through the quiet streets. They passed closed shops, parked cars, the occasional pedestrian who did a double, take it seeing Chuck Norris walking hand in hand with a little girl. The walk was peaceful, comfortable. The kind of easy silence between two people who just shared something meaningful. They reached her building a few minutes later, a modest apartment complex with worn brick and a tired-looking entrance. The kind of place where working families lived, where people did their best with what they had. Before they could even reach the door, it burst open with a bang that echoed across the street. A woman in scrubs came rushing out, her shoes slapping against the pavement, her face a mixture of panic and relief.
Emma! Where have you been? I was so worried.
Her voice cracked with emotion as she dropped to her knees and pulled Emma into a crushing hug. She buried her face in her daughter's hair, her shoulders shaking as tears of relief streamed down her face. Emma squirmed slightly in the tight embrace, but hugged back just as fiercely. Mom, this man saved me. 4 bad guys tried to steal my bag and he... Her words tumbled out in an excited rush, muffled against her mother's shoulder as she tried to explain everything at once. Her mom pulled back, holding Emma at arm's length to check her over for injuries, her hands running over her daughter's arms and face. Satisfied that Emma was unharmed, she looked up at Chuck for the first time. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes went wide. Her hands froze mid-motion. Wait, you're oh my God. The recognition hit her like a lightning bolt, and for a moment she seemed unable to breathe, her brain struggling to process that Chuck Norris was standing on her doorstep. Chuck smiled warmly, the kind of humble, gentle smile that put people at ease. Just happy she's safe, ma'am. His voice was sincere, devoid of any expectation of praise or recognition, like helping her daughter was the most natural thing in the world. Emma's mom stood up slowly, still holding Emma close to her side, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know how to thank you. Her voice was thick with emotion, gratitude pouring from every word, her hand pressed to her heart like she was trying to keep it from bursting. Chuck turned slightly, preparing to leave, to fade back into the night the way he preferred. No need. Just take care of her. But as he took his first step away, Emma's mom called out, her voice desperate and sincere.
Wait, please.
He paused, turning back to face her. She took a step toward him, her expression pleading, her hands clasped together. Come inside. Let me at least offer you some tea. It's the least I can do. Her eyes searched his face, hoping he wouldn't refuse, needing some way to express the gratitude that words couldn't capture. Chuck hesitated, his natural instinct to decline, to not impose, to keep his distance. He'd done what needed to be done, and that should be enough. But the look in her eyes, genuine gratitude mixed with a need to give something back, even something small, made him reconsider. He saw the earnestness there, the sincerity, and he understood that sometimes accepting gratitude is a gift you give to others. He nodded slowly, a small smile crossing his face. All right. Just for a minute, relief washed over her face, and she ushered them both inside, leading them up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway was clean but worn, the carpet threadbare in places, the paint peeling near the corners. She unlocked her door and welcomed them into a small apartment that was modest but clearly well-loved. Inside, everything was neat and organized despite the obvious age of the furniture. Family photos covered one wall, Emma at various ages, smiling, playing, growing up before the camera's eye. A small kitchen opened off the living room, clean dishes drying in a rack by the sink. The apartment was small, but it was a home, filled with the warmth that comes from love rather than money. Emma ran to her room to put her bag away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space, her excited voice calling out, "Wait till I tell my friends." Her mom poured 2 cups of tea from a kettle she'd clearly had warming on the stove, her hands shaking slightly as she handled the delicate cups. She sat across from Chuck at the small kitchen table, the surface barely big enough for 2 place settings. For a moment, she just looked at him, overwhelmed, before she found her voice. "She's all I have," the mom said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, her fingers wrapped around her teacup for warmth and comfort. Her father passed 2 years ago. It's just been the 2 of us. The pain in her voice was old but still sharp, the kind of loss that never fully heals that you just learn to carry. Chuck's expression softened immediately, compassion filling his eyes. "I'm sorry." The words were simple but genuine, spoken by someone who understood that sometimes there's nothing else to say. She smiled sadly, her eyes distant for a moment as memories flickered across her face. "She's strong. Stronger than I ever was at her age." Pride filled her voice when she spoke of Emma, the kind of fierce maternal love that would move mountains if it could. She paused, her fingers tightening around the cup, and when she spoke again her voice was even quieter. "The medicine in that bag, it's for me. I have a condition. Without it She didn't finish the sentence. She couldn't. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood. She didn't need to explain what would happen without her medication, what Emma would face if she lost her mother too. Chuck understood immediately, his face grave as the full weight of what could have happened settled over the room. That bag wasn't just a backpack. It was a lifeline, and Emma had been willing to fight for it, to run, to beg a stranger for help. She's a brave kid. You've raised her well. His voice was warm with genuine admiration, respect for this single mother doing her best in difficult circumstances. The mom smiled, but it was tired, worn down by long shifts and medical bills, and the constant worry of keeping everything together. The smile of someone who was doing their best but barely holding on. Then Emma came back out from her room, her earlier excitement replaced by a more solemn purpose. She was holding something behind her back, hiding it, her expression suddenly shy. Mr. Norris. She approached slowly, her feet shuffling, her eyes looking up at him with a mixture of nervousness and hope.
Yeah.
Chuck turned in his chair to face her fully, giving her his complete attention, his expression open and kind. I made this at school. I want you to have it. She brought her hands forward, revealing a small drawing that had been folded and unfolded many times, the creases visible across the paper. It was done in crayon on construction paper, the colors bright and cheerful despite the simple stick figure art. She handed it to him carefully, like it was precious, like it mattered more than anything. Chuck took it gently, holding it with both hands, treating it with the reverence it deserved. The drawing showed a stick figure man in a black belt standing next to a little girl. The man had gray hair and a smile. The little girl held his hand. They were surrounded by hearts and stars, at the top in crayon, written in a child's careful handwriting, "My hero." Chuck stared at it for a long moment, his eyes tracing every line, every color, every detail that Emma had put into this simple but profound gift. His throat tightened unexpectedly, emotion rising in a way he hadn't anticipated. He'd received awards, accolades, honors from around the world, but somehow this simple crayon drawing meant more than any of them. Then he carefully folded it and tucked it into his jacket pocket, right over his heart, patting it gently to make sure it was secure. I'll keep this safe. Thank you, Emma. His voice was thick with emotion, rougher than usual, and his eyes shimmered with moisture he didn't bother to hide. She hugged him without warning, throwing her small arms around his neck with all the strength her little body could muster tight. Trusting, grateful, and for a moment Chuck Norris, action star, martial artist, living legend, cultural icon, was just a man being thanked by a little girl. Just a person who'd done the right thing and received the purest form of gratitude in return. He hugged her back gently, one hand patting her back, and over her shoulder he saw Emma's mom wiping tears from her eyes. In that small apartment, in that quiet moment, something profound had happened. Something that had nothing to do with fame or recognition. Something beautifully, perfectly human. If this moment touched your heart, type Raspati in the comments. A few days later, Chuck was back in California, settled into his home surrounded by familiar comforts and routines. He went through his normal activities, training in his dojo, spending time with family, answering emails, planning upcoming projects. But something was different. He couldn't stop thinking about Emma and her mom. The image of that small apartment kept appearing in his mind, the worn furniture, the peeling paint, the carefully organized space that spoke of dignity maintained despite hardship. He thought about Emma's brave face when she'd run to him for help, clutching that backpack like her life depended on it. Because, in a way it had. He thought about her mother's tired smile, the scrubs she wore from working long shifts at the hospital, the quiet admission about her medical condition, the weight of what they were carrying, just the two of them, alone in the world. So he made a few calls, first to his financial advisor, then to his lawyer, then to a few trusted contacts who could help him do what needed to be done. Conversations were had, arrangements were made, papers were drawn up and signed. Chuck was a man of action, and when he decided something needed to happen, he made it happen. Within a week, Emma's mom received a letter in the mail. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a plain white envelope with a return address she didn't recognize, mixed in with the usual bills and junk mail. She almost didn't open it, assuming it was another medical bill or insurance statement, another reminder of the financial burden she carried. But something made her pause, made her look closer at the elegant handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a check, enough to cover her medical expenses for the next year, maybe longer if she was careful. The amount was staggering, life-changing, impossible. She stared at it, her hands trembling, her vision blurring with tears as she read the numbers over and over, unable to believe what she was seeing. It had to be a mistake. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. And there was a handwritten note on simple paper the handwriting masculine and cleared. For Emma's hero. Keep being strong. CN. Just those few words, but they carried the weight of understanding, of respect, of one person acknowledging another's struggle and choosing to help. She cried. Deep, gulping sobs that came from somewhere profound and wounded inside her. She pressed the note to her chest and sank into a chair, overcome by relief and gratitude and disbelief. For the first time in 2 years, since her husband's death, she felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. Like maybe they weren't alone in this fight. Then, with shaking hands, she called the number printed at the bottom of the letter, barely able to dial through her tears. An assistant answered on the second ring, professional and warm. Hello, Emma's mom could barely speak, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know how to. The assistant's voice softened with understanding. You must be Emma's mother. Mr. Norris said you might call. I don't understand. This is too much. I can't accept. The assistant interrupted gently, kindly. Mr. Norris wanted me to let you know. He's also arranged for a scholarship fund in Emma's name. When she's ready for college, it'll be there. The words didn't make sense at first, her brain unable to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. A scholarship fund. For Emma. For her daughter's future, secured, guaranteed waiting. The mom couldn't speak. The phone trembled in her hand as she sobbed into the receiver, unable to form words, overwhelmed by a generosity she'd never experienced. Thank you. Thank you so much. The words finally came out broken. Repeated over and over because nothing else seemed adequate. How do you thank someone for changing your life? For giving your child a future? For seeing your struggle and choosing to help? The assistant's voice remained calm and compassionate, giving her time to process, to feel, to release the emotion. He said to tell you strong people raise strong kids. And the world needs more like Emma. Those words broke her all over again, and she cried until she had no tears left, clutching the phone like a lifeline. When she finally hung up, she sat in silence for a long time, the check and note spread on the table before her. Then she went to Emma's room, where her daughter was doing homework, and pulled her into the tightest hug. Mom, what's wrong? Nothing, baby, nothing is wrong. Everything. Everything is going to be okay. Meanwhile, back on that Dallas street, something else happened. Something that proves second chances aren't just given, they're earned. The four thugs. They didn't forget what happened that night. How could they? Every time they moved wrong, their bruised ribs reminded them. But more than the physical pain, something else lingered, shame, regret, and for some of them, a genuine desire to change. One of them, the youngest of the group, maybe 19 or 20, showed up at a local community center a week later. He stood outside for 10 minutes, hesitating, almost leaving 3 times before finally working up the courage to walk through the door. Inside, he approached the front desk where a middle-aged woman was organizing papers. I want to sign up for a class. What kind of class, honey? He took a deep breath, the words difficult but necessary. Self-defense. Or martial arts. Something like that. She smiled and handed him a brochure for their martial arts program. He signed up on the spot, paying the registration fee with money he'd been saving for something far less meaningful. He showed up to his first class early, nervous, out of place among the other students who seemed to know what they were doing. The instructor, a patient man in his 50s with decades of experience, noticed the young man's discomfort and approached him after the session. First time. Yeah. I'm not sure I belong here. Why did you come? The young man hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. I met Chuck Norris. And he didn't just beat me. He taught me something. The instructor raised his eyebrows, interested now. What's that? The young man's voice was quiet but firm, the words clearly something he'd been thinking about for days. That strength without respect is just violence. And I don't want to be that guy anymore. He looked down at his hands, remembering how he'd used them that night, how close he'd come to doing something he could never take back. I want to be better. I want to use strength to protect people, not hurt them. The instructor studied him for a long moment, seeing past the tough exterior to the genuine desire for change underneath. Then he smiled, a warm expression that spoke of second chances and redemption. Then you're in the right place. He extended his hand, and the young man shook it, feeling for the first time in a long time like he was on the right path. Welcome. We'll help you become who you want to be. Over the following weeks, the young man threw himself into training with a dedication that surprised everyone, including himself. He was always early, always attentive, always respectful. He didn't brag about his encounter with Chuck Norris, didn't use it for street cred or attention. He just worked, trained, grew, and slowly, he began to understand what real strength looked like. Not the ability to hurt, but the choice to protect. Not dominance through fear, but respect earned through character. The other 3 thugs went their separate ways. Some changed, some didn't. But this one, he found a new path, all because one night, instead of being destroyed, he was given mercy. And sometimes, that's all someone needs to change their life. Respect isn't about who's watching. It's not about cameras rolling or crowds gathering, or social media posts going viral. It's not about recognition or praise or getting credit for doing the right thing. It's about who you are when no one important is around. It's about the choices you make in those quiet moments, when you think nobody will ever know. It's about treating people with dignity not because of what they can do for you, but because that's who you are. Chuck Norris didn't help Emma because cameras were rolling, or because he knew the story would spread across the internet. He didn't step in because he wanted recognition or applause, or to remind people who he was. He helped her because it was the right thing to do, because a little girl needed help, and he was there, and that was enough. And in doing so, he didn't just save her that night. He changed lives that extended far beyond that single moment on a Dallas street. He gave a struggling mother hope when she had none left. He gave a little girl a future that had seemed impossible just days before. He inspired a young man to abandon a destructive path and choose something better. He planted seeds of kindness that will grow for years, maybe generations. Because that's what real heroism looks like. Not the flashy moves or the dramatic victories, though those have their place. But the quiet choice to help when you don't have to. The decision to show mercy when you could show force. The willingness to see potential in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. True strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how gently you can lift others up. It's about using your power to protect the vulnerable instead of dominating the weak. It's about understanding that the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching, but what they do when they think no one will ever know. Chuck Norris could have walked away that night. He could have ignored Emma's cries, pulled out his phone, called the police from a safe distance. No one would have blamed him. He had no obligation to get involved, but he didn't walk away, because real heroes never do. They shut up. They stand up. They step up. Not for glory or recognition, but because someone needs help, and they have the power to give it. That's the lesson Emma will carry for the rest of her life. That's the example her children will hear about and try to emulate. That's the story that young man will tell his students years from now when he's the one teaching martial arts. One moment. One choice. One act of courage and compassion. And the ripples spread outward, touching lives in ways we can't even measure. If you believe in standing up for the vulnerable, type hero in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to personally thank every single one of you. And remember, we've got more incredible stories coming your way. Stories of courage, of redemption, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that remind us what humanity looks like at its best. Let us know in the comments which part hit you the hardest. Was it the fight? Emma's drawing? The scholarship? The young man's transformation? Your feedback helps us bring you even better content. It helps us understand what moves you, what inspires you, what stories need to be told. Stay humble. Stay strong. And never underestimate the quiet ones. Because you never know when the person standing next to you is capable of changing the world. Or when you might be that person for someone else. See you in the next story.